Thank you for listening to the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays, and I'm here with a special guest for Text Driven Tuesday. We've got Parker Greene with us.
Hey-o. How are you, George?
In all transparency,
It's Monday, George.
It's Monday.
It's supposed to be Monday. And we know that as everybody is listening to this on Tuesday, they've already had their Monday, and they can relate to what they haven't seen behind the scenes.
So, Jay's not here.
No.
Got a text last night. Hey, Parker's got a free day. Wanted to know if we could record because you preached yesterday, Sunday.
Yes.
And I said yes, and Larry said yes, and then like 10 seconds later, he comes back with, oh, dang, I forgot. I got a doctor's appointment.
It happens, man. Those doctor's appointments sneak up on you.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are. It's
He had one of those, excuse me, he had one of those weekends that was a little off schedule for him, preaching at another church,
Right.
filling in, so
right.
I can totally relate to, like, I'm off schedule, things aren't right, different things are happening, and, that snuck up on me. 'Cause that happens to me almost every day.
Which it doesn't matter because he's sick today anyway. So
it's going around.
He wouldn't have been here anyway.
Glad you mentioned that. You're going to see me leaning off to cough, grabbing coffee to keep the throat warm.
Yeah. Again, all transparency, this is our second take because I forgot to press the record button.
Well,
so we had a pretty good conversation going.
We had a great conversation. I just look at it as, it's the remedial training for me. Help me get into the.
I'm sitting over here in Jay's seat, and I have no idea what I'm doing.
But you got a baseball bat behind you.
I do.
That makes me think of the Cubs.
Okay.
Right? So we'll just go with that.
Yeah. You've been following any of the baseball news that's been?
Not really. So I almost wore my Houston Astros hat in here, but I didn't want to be that.
Are you trying to come in antagonistic?
Yeah, and that's why I didn't. But I knew I had that. Also, I had I had my Oklahoma City Thunder shirt on, and I thought, what? If I wear either one of those, you're going to ask me baseball news, basketball news, and I won't get into the Thunder, but I was like, I quit watching baseball when the Cubs won the World Series because I was like, this is peak baseball.
Oh, yeah,
it's over.
There's nothing else to see.
Well, I mean, it's just
they can just shut the whole thing down, and
everything after that is postscript.
Okay.
So I do watch playoffs some, but I don't keep up with the day-to-day news.
Yeah.
It's a good thing Jay's not here because I say it's kind of boring to watch for me. But I'm glad they sped up the game a little bit. That helps. There we go. That hurt, didn't it?
Let's talk about the Bible. Yeah.
No, it's a good sport to watch because you can do other stuff and not really miss anything.
It's relaxing. Jay's talked about taking a nap.
Yeah. That's when I watch golf. Okay. I need a nap. That was how I grew up. We come home from church. We eat lunch. My dad turns on the golf tournament.
Okay.
And, of course, we're old, so there's one TV in the living room, not multiple devices throughout the house. And the golf tournament's on, and then he's snoring, and then you're tiptoeing through the room because you don't want to wake him up.
Okay.
He wasn't mean. You just respected the time and space.
Right.
But, yeah, that was nap time.
Okay.
Baseball, though, if you go to a game, I've been to very few, you've got to be alert. Because depending on where you sit, you could be in danger.
Yeah, you don't want to get hit.
Yeah, seen too many of those crazy videos.
So this is December, and we try to get the other elders into preaching. We've been having a leadership development class, and some guys in the church, including you. You're not like officially like in the class, but you're there.
It's always good to learn.
But with all the head knowledge that you can get, really the best way to get better at preaching is to actually preach.
100%.
You can read all the books on preaching, but if you don't actually do it, if you don't put it into practice, you're just not going to improve.
And in that class, you and Jay have talked about preach in front of your family. Like if you're working on it and practicing it, because it is a labor. Get your family in front of you. It's intimidating, but it's got to be in front of people. It can't be just you in the shower trying to recite your sermon. It needs to be in front of people. And
I don't know. Julia could correct me. I don't think I've ever preached in front of her at home.
You have more opportunities to preach in front of people than
Yeah.
lay elders do. So
Right.
you get that time in.
Yeah. Yeah. So we try to get the other elders in, and so you preach 2-3 times a year, and we in take one in our practice conversation we were talking about how you go about picking what passage you're going to do, because I know when I'm just preaching one sermon, it's really hard for me to just pick one passage because there's so many.
It really is.
Maybe not. I don't know if it's harder for you in the summer because you're not preaching through a book. We've got Dave's preaching through Acts and Philip is preaching through James. You're not preaching through really a book. Is it more difficult to choose something in the summer, or is Christmas? I mean, Christmas is kind of a that's kind of a it's. I mean, there are many passages you can choose from, but
there's a few that are clear.
But you're kind of geared towards Christmas. Is it more difficult in the summer or the Christmas? Is it easy for you to just pick something?
It should be easier at Christmas because there are some very clear passages on the coming Messiah. For me, in the summer, I actually find that easier. When you're preaching expositionally, to your point, you want to go through a passage so you've got the context and you can build on it. It's written as one text, one letter, one whatever genre it is. You can build on that, and your people are right there with you walking through it. So through the summer, that's harder for me because I find it hard to go through and say, well, 6 months ago, we were here.
Right.
So,
and I imagine that's probably pretty difficult for Dave and Philip. Maybe very difficult for Dave. I mean, he's preaching
more so
through Acts, and so trying to get everybody back into the context. That's
particularly
it's a challenge. Yeah,
narrative.
Yeah.
So I typically in the summer or other times of the year, I typically go to Psalms. Phil Johnson does that a lot. He's said that he gets invited to a lot of places.
Yeah,
he's coming in. He doesn't have context to build on the context of the Scripture. I do the same thing. But at the same time, our church gets that on Wednesday night. So I am looking at maybe finding a shorter book that I can do in the summer and knock out half a book for something shorter.
Just pull out Obadiah and just preach through Obadiah.
I mean that's on the list right
on
there.
The short list there.
But for this one, for Christmas, it's Advent season, and we are celebrating the very gracious, special gift, undeserved gift of Christ coming in the flesh to live the life that we can't. And there are some very clear passages pointing towards that. Philip and I talked. We're like, hey, we're leading into each other. How do we do this? So we kind of ordered who preaches when on that.
Okay.
And as it worked out, I was taking this week partially because I had planned on being on vacation this week, and I needed to get it done so I didn't have the stress of travel and then lead into a sermon. Yeah. And who doesn't like listening to Philip on Christmas? I love listening to him preach on Christmas.
Yeah.
So I looked at it, and to your point, I made it harder than it needed to be.
Okay.
I tried to get, I looked at the same passage. I've preached many of these before. It's like, I want to preach something different. How do I find, not insert the Messiah in the text, but find a place that we don't preach as often?
I feel like you take some kind of pleasure in making it more difficult for yourself. You've preached Psalm 119.
Yes.
Now, I mean, this. When you think of Isaiah 7, you think of the prophecy of the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. But there's a lot more to the passage than that. There's more going on.
And that is how I found the happy medium. And we'll read it. And to your point, yes, I've heard this passage of the virgin birth before, and it's not in the context
Yeah,
of
it's
what's
just kind of
happening
it's just kind of
historically.
ripped out of the passage, right?
And I think there's so much to that history. When Isaiah is prophesying, it's very relative to what's happening today. And I think
Okay.
that gets lost in a lot of Advent sermons that I have preached and
Okay.
that I've heard.
Okay. All right. Well, we're in Isaiah chapter 7. Parker preached Isaiah 7 verses 1 through 17. So if you have a Bible, you can grab that and follow along, or we'll pull it up on the screen and have you read it. And I'll try to keep up with your reading. So
Okay.
you got your Bible in front of you. You don't need me.
I'll do my best.
Okay. All right. Let's pull it up. We're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 7, verses 1 through 17. Is there anything that we need to know before we get into the actual chapter?
Probably. What am I missing?
I don't know. You preached it.
No, let's. I'll just read it.
Just
and then
read it. Okay.
We'll jump into it.
Okay. All right.
All right. Starting in verse 1. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not yet mount an attack against it. When the house of David was told, Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. And the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out and meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub your son, and at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field, and say to him, Be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint, because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands at the fierce anger of Rezin in Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah have devised evil against you, saying, Let us go up against Judah and terrify it, and let us conquer it for ourselves, and set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it. Thus says the Lord God, It shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. And within 65 years Ephraim will be shattered from being a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you are not firm in your faith, you will not be firm at all. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol or as high as the heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to test. And he said, Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria.
All right. Well, so there's the context in which the prophecy is announced. What do we need to know here?
Well, we need to know that there's a lot going on historically, and I found it particularly interesting tying this back to Jay's sermons on Judah. You've got a lot of political angling going on in the world, a lot of alliances, a lot of warfare, and you have Syria, which is north of Israel, the northern kingdom, lying between Israel and Assyria, think Nineveh. They know the Assyrians are coming. So the Syrians and the northern kingdom, who to say they're ungodly would be an understatement, they know they need a stronger, united front against the Assyrians. And Ahaz, Judah, they are not playing. They are not going along with it. So the Assyrians and Israel say, we got to knock Ahaz off his throne, put our guy in there so that we can have a unified front against the Assyrians. So
Okay.
that's kind of the backdrop.
Okay. All right. Well, I got to say, I noticed that you have been working on sermon delivery, so it was very noticeable, at least to me. So, whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Appreciate that.
I could definitely tell that you've been working on that.
That was several days of the flu, NyQuil, Advil. Jay had pitched, as you mentioned in that class, some preachers need an energy drink. So there was an energy drink involved there just to kind of get me up to being able to stand. So it was a rough morning, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. I pulled this up really fast in case anyone needed to see this map, because it can be difficult if you don't know where these places are. There's a lot of names, a lot of locations. Most Bibles have the 67th book, the Book of Maps, in the back, and maybe have something similar to this. You can pull this up on the screen. So we've got Judah down here. So after Solomon's death, we have the kingdoms split into two. The Davidic kings are in the south, in Jerusalem. There's Jerusalem right there. And the northern kingdom of Israel with Samaria as the capital. And then we've got Syria is over here with Damascus up here. And then the Assyrians.
Different people.
Different kingdom. The Assyrian Empire is here, and then over off the map. They're over in Iraq.
Northern Iraq.
Yeah. So that's kind of what's going on here. Is we've got Ahaz, who's king of Jerusalem. We've got Pekah, who is the king of Samaria, the king of Israel, and then we have Rezin, who's the king of Syria in Damascus.
And notably, what you won't see on the map is you see the Arab tribes there, Sinai Peninsula, and there's water on each side of that triangle.
Right here.
Yeah, there's a nod to a town that Syria takes. The Assyrians take Elath. That's at the very bottom of that, and it shows that Judah's getting squeezed from all sides.
Okay. All right. Lots of pressure there.
Lots of pressure.
Lots of pressure.
As we're looking in the world today, just pick your continent. It seems like there's war or posturing for war, and there's a lot of countries, a lot of people who feel the pressure of the world surrounding them.
You started with an illustration from more recent history, more modern history, with
Neville Chamberlain.
Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah, so trying to find an illustration that kind of related, but most people maybe had some exposure to, at least in high school or through their grandparents. We had World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, and the United Kingdom, one place I read, lost over 1 million people, and that's a lot for a nation that size.
Right.
And here they are, and as we can relate, they're not ready for another war.
Yeah.
They've lost a generation. So you go from that to here comes the Germans again, who were just defeated and who are not supposed to have a military. They're on the march, taking over, and these politicians who know that their political fate hang on peace, they're doing everything they can to not get dragged into another war. So they're running around, what alliances can we make? What concessions can we make to save face and keep peace?
Mm-hmm. And they do. They keep making concessions.
They did. I didn't, people have mixed feelings on Chamberlain. I didn't want to come into this. He did good, he did bad. But,
yeah, right.
Just to show that, like the Czech people, they didn't get a vote, and sorry, you're giving up your land to the Germans. That's not good.
Yeah.
Sudetenland also. The question in history, was it a brilliant delay tactic because he immediately ramped up the war machine in Great Britain?
Yeah.
Or was it just an acknowledgement?
Did he not trust Hitler?
I wonder.
Seems like a trustworthy individual.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, they had to acknowledge that they were way behind.
Okay. So how did you bridge? Did you move from your opening illustration into this?
Yeah. So what the British people were faced with was they were in the midst of hard times,
Mhm.
and they were not prepared for it. So how are we, knowing that there will be hard times, we can hope for Pollyanna pie in the sky, everything's going to be okay.
Mhm.
But we know that there will be hard times in life.
Mhm.
Now, you and I, the people in our church, we may not be rushed off to war tomorrow. We pray that we aren't. Uh, but we're gonna face some struggles that will shake your faith.
Mm.
So how do you react to that?
Mhm.
Some people just try and find everything on YouTube, Google, who are the experts in the world that I can cling to. And when all else fails, none of that worked. No MD Anderson, no counseling worked. Maybe we should pray about it. That's kind of the angle I was taking there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we've got these hard times, and in the midst of whatever struggles we might encounter, God is going to be faithful. Right?
Yes, not only I try to show God's faithfulness independent of our faith, because here what we're seeing in the text.
That's certainly there. Right?
Yeah, Ahaz was faced with a choice. God's plans are sure. What God has decreed will happen.
Mm.
You can get in line and get on your knees and repent and turn in faith to Christ, or you can face His wrath and judgment that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's true for us too.
Okay. All right. So your sermon, you had 3 points, 3 certainties in adversity.
Much easier to write.
Kind of have a rhythm to that.
Yeah, I had a much longer, PNP, preposition, noun, plural, whatever it is. Sorry, Jay.
You've let him down.
I mean, I got it there. It's on the paper. But it was much longer. But I don't like writing those when I'm taking notes, because then I'm focused on what was that word, and then I miss what the pastor's saying. So I was like, how can I make this more concise and clear? Yeah. And then I turned it into a tongue twister. Okay. I tried to say it. So there we go. But I guess it sticks. 3 certainties in adversity.
Okay. All right. Well, 3 certainties in adversity. You had arrogance, the arrogance of
self-reliance.
Self-reliance. Okay. You had I'm trying to do it by memory, even though I've got your notes right here.
Yeah, I'm still in cold medication, so I'm looking.
Okay.
The plans of the Lord are sure.
The plans of the Lord are sure. And then I don't remember.
God's faithfulness never fails.
Yeah. God's faithfulness. Yeah, God's faithfulness never fails. Yeah, I know where you're going. I saw it in the text.
Oh, good. That's what I was hoping for.
I told you last night. Confession: I didn't take any notes yesterday because I didn't think that we were doing a podcast. So I was just listening.
You were gearing up for the Nutcracker.
I was just listening. Let's not talk about the Nutcracker.
Hey, talk to me after 10 years.
We won't talk about baseball. We won't talk about the Nutcracker. So 3 certainties in adversity: the arrogance of self-reliance, the plans of the Lord are sure, and God's faithfulness never fails.
Right.
All right. So let's get the context of what's happening here, because we looked at the map. There's King Ahaz. He's in Jerusalem. He's the king of Judah. He's the Davidic king. He is a descendant of King David. Then we have Pekah, who sounds like a Pokemon.
Yeah, I almost said that in the sermon. I almost did. I stopped myself.
That's what the podcast is for, brother. He's up in Samaria in Israel, and then we've got Rezin up in Damascus in Syria.
Right.
And tell us a little bit more about what's going on. Tell us a little bit about Ahaz.
Yeah, so I did mention this sermon, and that was one that I almost saved, but thought better go ahead and put in. Yeah, I grew up in mega church, and you'd look at a couple verses here and there, and you'd get some context. But looking at verse 10, and I saw and had always seen as a kid, Ahaz says, "Don't put the Lord your God to test," and he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that." And I'm like, "Man, this is one of the good kings." And then I see the rebuke there, and it goes back to some people think and hold this view: the God of the Old Testament is mean. Because look at that. Here, this guy is saying, "I'm not going to put God to test," and he gets rebuked.
Right.
But then you turn back and like, who is this Ahaz guy? And that's what I told folks, like, stick a old copy of a bulletin in, because we're going to go back and forth, because context matters.
Right. Yeah, we know more about Ahaz from Kings. Right.
So his kingly reign is outlined there in 2 Kings 16.
So we'll probably get into it a little bit, but this prophecy seems, at least I think, comes before some of the stuff that we read about in 2 Kings 16.
Yeah, and that's when I was introducing, I was like, let's look at his character here, and this is the character of the man that we're dealing with, because I viewed his character as like, oh, he's contrite, he's saying, I'm not going to put the Lord your God to test. Who is he?
Right.
And then you look and see what kind of
his heart is. So what kind of guy is this?
Well, he burns his children as offerings and sacrifices to gods.
Is that? I've been told that's healthcare.
In America, that's what we're told. That's just healthcare. That's like him, like setting himself up to live his best life now.
It's interesting. We this is chasing a rabbit that you didn't bring up at all. But it's interesting. People like to make abortion like the sterile medical thing.
Right. It's a life choice.
But really, it's, I say healthcare. It's just, I'm just being facetious. But you look at these people like Ahaz. It says that he burned his son as an offering. It literally says he made his son pass through the fire.
Right.
And we think, well, that was evil, but abortion, that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
But really, if you stop and you think about why people are having abortions, it's for the same reasons that guys like Ahaz were making their children pass through the fire. They're trying to appease the God, so that he'll bless you.
There were two items in the sermon it was hard for me to not spend more time on, and that was one, was abortion, because as I prepared the sermon, I wanted to have the context of the times and talk about, we've got a new birth, a new Messiah, a new covenant coming, and there were a couple points, and that was probably the most prominent, where it's like I was struggling with how much time to spend on that, because I didn't want to keep it so much on that.
Right.
And that was a struggle for me, because it is exactly the same thing. It's the God of self-fulfillment.
They're offering
self-preservation.
They're offering their son to probably Molech.
Yeah, Molech.
And in response to that, Molech is supposed to bless them with prosperity. Right?
Yeah, it's absolutely, today we don't call it a god, but it's self-preservation. It's self-fulfillment.
I don't have time for a kid. I don't have, like, that's going to affect my career, or whatever it is.
Let's chase this rabbit. Have you heard of the Dinks?
I have. Yeah, I have.
The dual income, no kid. Look how great our life is.
Yeah.
Never mind God's command for us to be fruitful, multiply, spread. We're His image bearers. Our children, hard to believe when they're toddlers, but are His image bearers also. And
marred image bearers.
And it's hard for us to, like, this is our way of fulfilling His calling and purpose, is to have these children. And no, it's not easy. Yes, it can be expensive.
Yeah.
It can take you, wait for it, George, to the Nutcracker ballet. I saw a video snippet of it was sent to me. No sound, like I heard every note that was being played, because I've been to enough of them to know, and it's fine. I enjoy it now, in small doses. But the children, like, that's what we're called to. But to say, hey, we need to pacify this God in Molech and Ahab's case, because, like, we're not getting the crops we need. There's war around us. We're going out and we're going to find everything we can in the world to solve our problems. except the one that can,
Right.
and the one that will.
What makes it even worse for Ahaz? I mean, he's sacrificing his child. But if we think about who Ahaz is, he's the Davidic king.
Yes.
And the promise is that one of David's sons are going to sit on the throne forever. Ahaz killing one of his sons is just a blatant disregard for the promises of God.
Yeah, it's. I don't even have the words for how abominable it is.
Yeah. So he makes his son pass through the fire. He doesn't follow the law of God. You summarized it.
I said he's bad.
He's bad. Yeah, Ahaz is one of the wicked kings. Right. Yeah.
In one of the sermons, I can't remember which one it was. I'm not even trying to remember. I did a study on the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. How many of these are described in Kings and Chronicles as did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, or did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord? And it's astonishing.
Yeah.
The ratio there. There's just a handful. It's not even a third did what was right in the eyes of the Lord.
Right. Yeah. Which highlights God's
patience
and mercy towards Israel. Yeah. So Ahaz is a wicked king. And now he's faced with this crisis, this national crisis.
Yeah, this is an existential threat, and that's kind of why I tied it back to World War II, because for Great Britain just coming off a war depleted, that's an existential threat for them.
Right.
So Ahaz is in this also.
Yeah. So Pekah, king of Israel, directly to the north, and he's made an alliance with Rezin, the king of Damascus. Syria is maybe not a superpower, but they're a powerful nation. They've been a constant threat to Israel for years.
Yeah, they have been in the northern kingdom and Judah. They've had their wars on and off, and land goes back and forth between them. And prior to Ahaz, some of his predecessors, including Uzziah, had expanded Judah, and now he's seeing this shrink. And he's got to be thinking, "What is my legacy?"
Right.
You've got some kings that reign for 60 years, some that don't make it, but not even 10. How is this going to end for me?
So now I've got a note in my Bible. This was around 735 BC, somewhere around there. This alliance they want to come and take over. And it says here in verse 6 that they want to set up the son of Tabeel as king.
Yeah, they want a puppet king.
Do you know who that is?
I started researching that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what they're looking for is they fear the Syrians, and I think it goes without. So you could do a much deeper study on this. Israel, I mean, study their history. Oh my goodness, when they split from the kingdom, they're like, we can't go to the temple in Jerusalem. We're setting up cow gods.
Right.
Let's go back to the desert here.
The golden calves. Yeah.
But they're still, they were part of the tribes of Israel called out of Egypt, and they're going to a foreign king to set up a puppet government in Judah to fight the Assyrians rather than turn to God.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about these three certainties. The first one is the arrogance of self-reliance. So we talked a little bit about the character of Ahaz, but now we see in this passage particularly his arrogance.
Yeah, I saw this pretty clearly, so I don't think the viewers can see it. I'm using one of the preaching Bibles. It doesn't lay out the poetry as well. Yours probably does better, but you've got verses. Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter. How about I get to the right chapter? Flip back over.
Got to turn back over.
Yeah, that's the fun part about going between verses. There in chapter 7, he gives them a prophecy. Thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand. So verses 7 and 9, you see a chiasm. And Philip and I talked about this. Been listening to Jim Hamilton. You're probably more familiar with him than I can say, but I call him the chiasm king.
Oh, yeah,
Find a chiasm in anything, and is right 90% of the time, probably more. But you see this, and you see, hey, this is what's happening to Israel. Ahaz knows like their days are numbered. So this is what's next for you. And you can see the destruction of Israel coming, and it's the irony should not be lost on him that he keeps referring to Israel, the northern kingdom, as Ephraim, which is just one of the tribes. So like they're shrinking, they're smolder, they're nothing. He calls them a smoldering stump. He's like, look, this is all that's left of them. Like their days are numbered.
Yeah. So they have this crisis. The king of Israel, the king of Syria, they're going to come down, and it says in verse 2, when the house of David was told Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. We're seeing their unbelief.
Right.
We need to remember that the biblical authors are using precise words. There's no throwaway words. So when it's introduced as when the house of David heard this, we should be thinking God has given these promises to David.
Right.
We should know that Israel and Syria are not going to be able to come in and just kill the king.
We should know that, and Ahaz should know
he
that.
should know that too, right?
And that's I like the some of the commentaries called that out. That I think I mentioned it. There's all these names of kings and kingdoms and lineage, and that's the stuff I skip so many times.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's not in there as filler. It's in there like, who are we referring to?
Right.
What is the lineage of Rezin? What is the lineage of Pekah? What is your lineage?
Yeah.
Ahaz?
Right. Right.
Whose house are you?
Right. Yeah. And so he's already afraid. And then Yahweh sends Isaiah to go and meet Ahaz at this pool and take his son with him.
His son, yes. His son named A Remnant Shall Return.
Okay. And he tells him not to worry.
Right. And there's so many times we see this in the Old Testament where Judah's like they're done. They're encircled, and God's saying, I'm here. Be still.
Yeah. This I mean, we'll come back to verses 7 and 9 through 9 and the promise that this won't happen. But it does highlight the fact that God's being merciful to a wicked king.
Yes.
Like this is Ahaz didn't start out good and then
turn bad. Yeah.
Turn become rebellious.
Make a few bad choices.
Yeah. He's bad the entire time. And he actually gets worse after I think after the prophecy is given.
Right. Yeah.
I think he becomes even worse. And for God to do this, it reminds us that God is a compassionate, merciful God, even to these wicked kings.
I didn't go there in 2 Kings, but after Ahaz's buddies in Assyria destroy,
I think
he goes to Damascus.
Yeah.
He goes to Damascus and says, "Oh, look at this pagan temple and altar. Let's take that back and use that as a new altar for the Lord."
Yeah. So we've got this. So God gives these prophecies through Isaiah to Ahaz. This isn't going to happen. They're going to be shattered within 65 years. Right? He actually gives them a time frame. And then he graciously tells Ahaz, ask for a sign.
Yeah.
And Ahaz is like,
nah.
I will not do that.
Yeah.
It's I'm with you. When you read that, you're like, oh, well, that's good. He's not going to put God to the test. He's been putting God to the test his entire reign.
Yes.
his entire kingdom has been putting God to the test this entire time.
Yeah, and back to your earlier point, he says the house of David shook. God is not saying my faithfulness is to Ahaz. Ahaz is not my chosen son.
Yeah.
But this is the promise I made to David. This is my people, and there is more to come.
Right. Yeah. And so even when God tells him, ask for a sign.
Yeah, he's
got this false piety, right? Like it's like this thin veneer of piety.
To talk about the arrogance here.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, God, I mean, he speaks and says, ask anything, as deep as Sheol, as high as heaven.
I try to make it clear that it says the Lord said to him. It's Isaiah talking to him,
Right.
but it's prophesying of the Lord. But the writing here makes it very clear that there's no confusion from Ahaz as who he is speaking with and who he's dealing with.
Right.
It's not like Moses walking into Pharaoh and who's this guy out of the woods that's got a magic trick.
Yeah.
This is very clear to Ahaz that this is God
Right.
speaking to him. And I mean, when that happens, this is a pivotal moment.
I don't know if I'm way off, trying to pick up on any language that sounds familiar. I try to figure out where that's from, just to see if there's any connections. And when God through Isaiah says, "Ask anything, let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven," it reminded me of Deuteronomy 30. I don't know if any of the commentaries you saw made this connection. I don't know if there is a connection or not. But in verses 11 through 14, Moses says, "This commandment that I command you today is not too hard for you, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that you should say, 'Who will ascend to heaven for us to bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it?' Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, 'Who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it?' But the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so that you can do it." And it's Moses, it's God speaking through Moses to say the law is not something out there that you don't know what it is, and you don't know how to obey it. It's as close as your heart.
Yeah, you're absolutely onto something there. And confession time. I was struggling with time management because, like, I'm looking at a clock that we have in the pulpit, and I'm watching it and seeing where I am in the sermon, trying to make sure I'm not getting bogged down on stuff, and keeping the right pace to be true to the text in the sermon. And it hits me like, I don't even know if this clock is right. Because sometimes
it should be pretty close. It may be a couple of minutes off, but it should be pretty close.
I'm looking at that, and you'll note in the sermon I picked up. You stopped there at verse 14. I picked up at verse 15, talking about this is the curse for disobedience. This is the blessing for obedience.
Yeah.
So I mean there is a connection.
It seems there's a literary connection there, that the law is close to him, and Ahaz doesn't do it.
Right.
He doesn't keep the law. And now God is saying, ask for a sign as high as heaven or as deep as Sheol, and I'll do it to show you that I'm going to be. It's God telling. It's trying to bring him back to being faithful to the law. Right.
It is, and that's why I tried to tie in. Okay, how does that apply to us? And went to the New Testament, where Jesus says, "You do not have because you do not ask."
Right.
So, trying to highlight Ahaz is not being pious there.
Right.
He's being aloof. He's being arrogant, and saying, "I don't need the blessing of the Lord."
Yeah.
I've got this under control.
I'm not gonna test him. And then we'll get back into the what God says through Isaiah, but he says at the end that the Lord is going to bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. And that's where we jump back to 2 Kings 16. I think this prophecy happens before. I don't know what you think. It seems like God tells Ahaz the king of Assyria is going to stop Pekah and Rezin. And so in response, Ahaz doesn't just believe. He says, I've got an idea.
Ahaz gives the Syrians a gift, like wrapped with a bow.
Right.
Because take contemporary political motive aside, you've got two kingdoms, independent kingdoms, Syria and the northern kingdom of Judah or Israel, fighting for their lives against Assyria. Why? Because Assyria has them next.
Right.
So they want an ally in Judah who doesn't come along. Judah says, "No, I'm going to join that other side."
Mm-hmm.
And Syria says, "Let's go."
Yeah.
And you can just clean the board.
Mm-hmm.
If you play Risk, that probably resonates.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're just able to swoop down and take it all.
Mm-hmm. The Ahaz, he's self-reliant, so he takes all this money out of the temple, doesn't he?
Temple of the
Out
Lord,
of the temple? Yeah, he takes it out of the temple, sends it to Assyria, and tells him, "Help me."
which is exactly how every country and every kingdom in that time operated.
Right.
It was, I'm getting attacked by someone strong. Let me align with someone stronger and pay them off.
Right.
And hope for the best.
And so we see his arrogance, his self-reliance. He's not going to. God has already told him this is what's going to happen.
God already said that's not going to work.
And Ahaz decides, well, I've got some money. I'll pay I'll pay Tiglath-Pileser to come and stop them. And then on top of that, like you were saying, after Tiglath-Pileser defeats Damascus, Ahaz goes up to Damascus and sees this altar.
Yeah.
And he sends word back to the priest, why don't you go ahead and build that and put it in front of the temple? And he starts worshiping at this altar that he saw in Damascus, which I think there's some irony there. He's going up to this conquered nation. I'm going to worship the way that this conquered nation.
Which is kind of part and parcel with Judah and Israel. We conquered this land.
Right.
Now let's take these Asherah poles. I mean, like
right.
we beat these people. Why are we doing this?
Yeah. So we're just confronted with Ahaz's self-reliance and his arrogance,
Right.
and it's really easy. I've made this point on Wednesday nights. We've been looking at Psalm 78, and it's all about how, despite all the ways God has been faithful to Israel, they keep sinning, they keep testing him.
Right.
And I said it's really easy for us to look at them and shake our head and say, those dumb Israelites. And it's the same thing here with Ahaz. Like, come on, Ahaz. Like, you should know better. But we do the same things, don't we?
One of the weirdest things in the New Testament to me is when you get sick, go to your elders and have your head anointed with oil.
Yeah.
Like, nobody today would even think of that. I would feel weird if somebody came up and said, "Hey, can you anoint my head with oil? I've got the flu."
I had a New Testament professor in seminary. He said that he had a little thing of oil that he would take to sick people if they asked.
Yeah, I mean, what do? We look at, what does my insurance cover? What is my deductible?
Right.
What are the best hospitals around? I don't like this one. How many years does this doctor have treating this? And then we go through weeks and months of doing that. It's like, maybe I should go to the church and put that on the prayer list.
Right.
That's
the last thing that we do.
It is.
Right before you do that, you grumble that the pastor didn't know you were
sick. Yeah.
You were in the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We're just as self-reliant.
Yeah,
we often will pay lip service to God will provide all of our needs, and then we fret.
And that's why
we fret over bills and
I brought up the lottery,
health, and
I mean, how many people are like, "Oh man, just need a couple extra bucks."
Yeah.
Now you've got the sports gambling on your phone that you can do.
Yeah.
Hey, I know these teams. I can make a quick $1,000 here,
yeah.
And then your star player gets hurt, and then you're $1,000 more in the hole, or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. You're right. We do it. Churches do it. Pastors can do it. We have all the promises laid out for us in the scriptures, and what's the cause of most of our anxiety and worry? It's that we're not believing.
It's us.
Yeah. Yeah, we're still trying to take care of it on our own. Yeah. Okay. But despite Ahaz's arrogance and his self-reliance
and unbelief, all that,
God still gives promises.
Yes, he does. And he, I grew up in the church where it was God sent his creation in order, and man sinned, and then it's like, oh no, well, don't worry, he's got a backup plan. God has never had a backup plan. That was mind blowing to me. That like he made us knowing that we are going to sin and reject him, but he loves us anyway.
Yeah.
His plans are sure. They've always been there, and what he says is going to happen will happen. And I thought it was interesting reading some of the commentaries. I didn't honestly read as much as I'd like, but they seem to land that the 65 years, like it was between 64 and 65 years that the Northern Kingdom was out of there.
Okay.
And I thought that was very specific and oddly specific because, oh man, you can probably start rattling off names of numerologists in the Bible that look at different parts for patterns. And people tell you, like, 1,000 is, not usually 1,000 years. It's talking about a long time, whatever the case may be. There's tons of examples of that. But this was oddly specific. So seeing that and seeing that, God, this to me was a different kind of prophecy.
Yeah.
In the sense that you've got a very oddly specific number there.
Yeah.
You've got very clear prophecies that you might just go ahead and call them predictions or statements. And then you've got the implicit there with, like, remember who you are. And then this very different promise coming in a virgin birth.
Okay. So the plans of the Lord are sure, and this is where we look specifically at verses 7 through 9. I had to take a little boy to the bathroom during this point, and I came back to you saying the magic word, chiasm. I came back and I was like, what is this now? What am I missing in here?
Yeah.
So looking at it, yeah, I can see it. I see it in verses 7 through 9. Some chiasms are more obvious than others. This one was, I didn't immediately look at it and say, oh, that's a chiasm. But yeah, I see it. What's the point of the chiasm? Because chiasms, they're not just, to remind people, a chiasm is, Jay uses the illustration of a sandwich.
That's a good one.
It's the first verse and the last verses, they mirror each other, and it moves inward until you get to the center, and the center usually is what's being highlighted. Not always, but usually. So what's being highlighted here? Is there something about the chiasm that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, this one, 3 verses, it says a lot.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the lineage. Look at the lineage, look at who you are. As we're looking at the lineage of, say, Israel and Damascus, we're looking at a very specific call that they are going to be destroyed. And on the other end of that, you're saying, who are you and which side are you going to take? Because Ahaz would know the history of the split kingdom, and he would know that the northern kingdom immediately rejected God, going to their Asherah poles, putting cows in a temple to worship, because they felt that if they continued to worship in Jerusalem, that they would be implicitly saying that they're subservient.
Right.
So he knows that they're a wicked kingdom. Even, looking at it, how wicked he is, no wicked king acknowledges his own wickedness for the most part.
Yeah.
So he's being pointed to, they are going to be destroyed. Where are you going to land? What is going to be your fate here? And that's kind of towards the end of the firmness of faith.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I'm looking here at my footnotes, and it looks like at the end of verse 9 that the you there starts becoming plural.
Yes.
So he's moving beyond just Ahaz. So he's meeting Ahaz at this, the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. Now, I'm sure you have that memorized, but
oddly specific.
Yeah, which God's telling him where to find him, right? But we would know that the king's not standing by himself,
right?
Like he's not just going out for a stroll by himself. He's probably got a retinue around him,
always.
Right? So he's now talking not just to Ahaz, he's talking to
all the people with him,
all of them, Right.
And I would say, and that is emblematic. That shows it's also all of Judah as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Okay. Well, is there anything else in verses 7 through 9 that we need to be picking up on?
Not unless we want to do a whole sermon on that.
Okay.
That honest, it was a challenge with this because it
Okay.
is a larger section of text, and like you can drill down too finitely on a verse or two, or in this case, that was another struggle. There's so much text here, and like what do you put in, what do you not put in?
Mm-hmm. Right. It is interesting that there's such a specific time frame here. So people who are hearing this would, many of them would be alive to actually see it.
They would.
I would imagine, and then
Not Ahaz, but
not Ahaz. Ahaz wasn't alive when the northern kingdom fell. It was Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the one who was king then. Is he the next king?
I don't think so.
I forget.
I want to say Hezekiah. Didn't he say?
Was he
the prophecy
grandson?
It won't be in your lifetime. He's like, oh, I'm glad to hear that.
That's Babylon.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Babylon. Yeah, I'm trying to. I don't have my my line of kings memorized. I need to get on that. Maybe I'll do that over Christmas break.
Yes. You've got all week. You've got all week.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. If he's the next one. Yeah, it looks like he's the son of Ahaz. So Hezekiah is the king when the northern kingdom falls.
Okay.
But he would have been.
Hey, you're right. I'm thinking of the Judah when Judah falls.
Yeah.
Hezekiah. So.
Yeah.
Good thing
So
it'll be
he would have been probably familiar with this. And it just bolsters the fact that Isaiah is a true prophet, but it also bolsters the fact that God's word is sure, that his promises actually come true. Which, when we see that this time frame within 65 years, both of these kingdoms are going to be gone, it also bolsters the third point, which is where we come down to the prophecy of this child who's going to be born.
Yeah, and before we get to that, the plans of the Lord being sure. I wanted to go there. I didn't because I knew time wouldn't allow. But it took me back to Joshua, and that's how I came up with the conclusion. I won't jump into that. But Joshua, famous story, sees a figure and says, "Whose side are you on?" And it's the angel of the Lord. And
right.
I was kind of worried with that. You're not going to change the plans of the Lord. You're either going to submit to the plans of the Lord or you're going to rebel against it. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here.
Okay. All right. So third point.
Third point
is that God's faithfulness never fails, right? God's faithfulness never fails. So we've got this promise directed to Ahaz, and now we've got a promise that's directed to the house of David as a whole,
yes.
Right? Which should kind of clue us into what's being talked about here.
Exactly.
Right. So what's going on here? Well, this is where we get to our Christmas theme.
Yeah, here we go. Now Christmas.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So here we have the promise of the virgin birth.
Okay.
And as I'm reading this and putting it in the historical context, this is where I go back to so many sermons where I hear this. It's like, yeah, we know there's a virgin birth. Oh, look, yeah, it was foretold.
Mm-hmm.
Coming at it from the angle of history.
Okay.
Like, this is a birth like they haven't seen. And I almost made it sound like there were unique births like happening all the time.
Right.
But there were very notable births that were not natural.
Right.
And it was to either older women who were beyond the years of giving birth, or it was to women who was well known in their culture at the time of their life that they could not have children. We're in a church with children present. I didn't want to go into a whole lot of detail there, but like it wasn't like, it's just coincidence they haven't had a child.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this was not coincidence that
Right.
they hadn't had child. And there's time after time. And then you start to see a pattern in some of these. And it's like, why is there such a pattern? Is it bad genetics? I don't think so. I think it's God saying, like, I'm sending you a message here. These are the trail clumps. And then we get to this one.
Right.
And there is some debate among commentators about what this virgin means.
Yes.
Is it just a young woman, or is it
Alma?
Yeah, exactly. Or is it a woman who has not been with a man before? I guess the better explanation of this is, like, it can't simply be a young woman. Otherwise, you're going to have 700 years of women saying, "Oh, hey, this is I'm a young woman. I had a baby. This is the Messiah."
Right.
Like, you can't have that.
Right.
So
right.
it's got to point us to this is a virgin.
Okay. All right. So we've got verse 14. Therefore, the Lord he tells Ahaz to choose a sign. Ahaz says no, so God's going to choose a sign for him.
Yes.
The Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted.
Yeah, so a little bit of
there's some questions around that, especially as we keep going in Isaiah. There's some other stuff that happens. So what do you come across?
A little bit of near far revelation, because when we talk about, what stood out to me was, like, in the context of the sermon, like, this could have been 3 to 4 hours, and I don't think anybody would stick around for that. So I found this fascinating because I see eating the curds and honey, and I think of land flowing with milk and honey, and I'm thinking this is a good thing. It's not.
Okay.
That was noted by almost all commentaries. Like, that's poverty stricken.
Okay.
This is a child being born in poverty.
Okay.
So as the wise men are looking for a king, and who do they go to? The king. This should point them, like, no, it's not going to be a royal family. It's going to be a more common family.
Okay.
So that gets lost a little bit. Some people commingle this as you're looking at the near-far revelation, and for folks who aren't familiar with that one prophecy, particularly when you're looking at Daniel, you can have a near-term fulfillment, but that is still pointing to a farther term fulfillment. Some people are looking at this as his temptation and Jesus' temptation and trial in the desert. I saw that in some commentaries.
Okay.
And others saw it as before he's born, like, the world as you know it is going to be gone. And I think that's a good take on it, because what happened for 400 years before Christ, there was no king sitting on the throne in Israel. So there's a lot that can go into this, and I intentionally wanted to stay away from that because that would bog us way down.
I mean, as you were preaching, I was looking at chapters 8 and 9 because it all seems to fit together. It looks like, and if I'm off, if you saw something different, you can let me know. But because you've been studying this, I haven't been studying. I've just been looking at it, while you were preaching. So my thoughts may not be God's thoughts. So he promises this sign of the virgin bearing a child, and his name will be Emmanuel. And then he says that the king of Assyria is going to come.
Right.
And then it seems like there's a break between 7 and 8 of maybe some time. And I think this may be where Ahaz hires Assyria,
right,
showing that he doesn't believe. And so now God gives Isaiah another prophecy, write this name on this sign or whatever, this tablet, Maher Shalal Hashbaz.
Yes, one of the greatest names.
One
in
of
the
the
Bible.
greatest names. It's a fantastic name.
You see it everywhere in America today.
And then we have chapter 8 where it says that I went to the prophetess and she conceived and bore a son, and the Lord said to me, call his name Maher Shalal Hashbaz. For before the boy knows how to cry my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. So I think we've got 2 kids that are being prophesied here. And both of them will, before they are old enough, the northern kingdoms will be gone.
Right.
And so it seems like Maher Shalal Hashbaz is a type, a shadow of this greater son who's going to be born in the future of the Virgin.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of those places where I was getting really bogged down in like how much context to put in.
Yeah.
Because where I was going with that typology also is looking at Adam as a type, failed. David as a type, failed. All these types who we're looking for that failed. I was going to tie that into us, elders. We're not perfect. Husbands, like we're supposed to be the head of the household. We're not perfect. That should point our families to Christ. So I was getting really into the weeds, and how do I sort?
Oh, I know.
That?
Yeah, that's that can be a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what can the congregation take in.
Yeah,
like they can't take in all this in one sitting.
Well, I can't explain it
in one sitting. Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I think because we've got this theme of a child coming for 3 chapters. The virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And then we have Maher Shalal Hashbaz. I just like saying that name over and over and over. And he's going to be born. And then chapter 9, there is this child who's going to be born, who's going to he's going to be called Everlasting Father,
right.
Mighty God. Like that's not Maher Shalal.
No.
That's here in chapter 8. That's Emmanuel. Right, so it seems like there's typology going on with these two sons,
and I think it speaks to the recognition that through the Old Testament there needs to be that need to look, to test. Is this the one? To lift your eyes to heaven?
Yeah.
Is this the one? To your point, that's not the one. David was not the one.
Right.
Who is the one? And now we're in hindsight, looking back, we know who is the one.
Right.
But there's a lot of discontent today with the patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be looking to Christ. And I think this is one of those steps in there to say, let's continue. We've got to continue to look and test. Not to bring in the Bereans. We've got to test the scriptures. We've got to, what are we looking at in the world? What are we hearing, taking in? Let's go back to scripture and put it to the test.
Yeah. And we see that God keeps his word.
I thought you were going to go to like 52, 53 in there in Isaiah.
Yeah.
We can leave that out.
Let's just do the entire book here, Parker. We got time. Yeah. But we see that God is faithful.
Yes.
Even in the midst of Ahaz's unfaithfulness, he still keeps his word.
Yeah, and I think to your point of listening to that prophecy, you're standing there. Were there men and women of faith that heard that? I can't say, but I want to believe there were.
Yeah.
And for them to hear that we see what's going on is not right, but we can still rest in God and his faithfulness.
Yeah.
Like he's not going to abandon his faithful ones. They saw what happened to the northern kingdom. They certainly know the history of their kings, particularly the evil ones, and seeing their demise. But what will happen to those who are faithful to God?
Right.
He's laying out promises. They got to think they're doomed. They've got to think that their nation's getting wiped out. But hearing, no, he still has a promise for us. That had to be a word of comfort to those who had faith.
Right. Yeah. As they're hearing of a child, it should take them back to the first promise of Genesis 3:15 that
exactly
a child is He's still coming. He's like Rezin and Pekah and Assyria. They're not going to nullify this promise. He's still coming.
They are not growing vines; they are smoldering stumps.
Yeah. So keep waiting. Keep looking for him. He's coming.
Right.
I think that they would have, at least the remnant would have recognized he's talking about the Messiah. The Messiah is still going to come. And it took another 700 years for the Messiah to actually come. But
that's when we tend to not like God's patience.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a reminder of the life of faith.
Right.
And we live in a time of when we see God's fulfillment, but we're reminded of these people of faith in the Old Testament and how they had to wait for hundreds of years for this to happen. They saw people born and die, and they went through exile and return, and the temple was destroyed, and they're under Assyria and Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome, and the faithful remnant are still looking. They were still waiting, and God fulfilled His promise. He brought Christ. And if God was faithful in that, if He was faithful in bringing that about, even after hundreds of years, then we should be living a life of faith as we're waiting for Christ to come, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we may get cancer. We'll have family members die. I had an illustration I didn't use, but Jay and I both served in Iraq, and I remember I was very fortunate. I wasn't around too many friends, colleagues that lost their lives. But every time it's like, why that guy?
Right.
I mean, that was a good kid. Young father doing the right things. Why him?
Yeah.
Young upcoming guy, and it always seemed like that. And those times in life are going to happen. Like, why did that happen to that person? I mean, we live today, and we've got plenty of people in this church that have known teenagers that have died of cancer. Like, why them?
Yeah.
Yet we're called to faith. Like, there's that was designed by God, and He has a plan for that, and we don't know it. But He calls us to be faithful to Him and to draw Him to. And we've got people in this church that had horrible things happen, and praise God, they responded in faith and came to Him.
Yeah.
I mean, praise God for that. I mean, what a testimony that is. I mean, I rejoice for that.
Right. Yep. All right. Well,
you gonna shut us down? Is that the cue?
Hey, you got anything else that you want to bring out of the passage? I know there's a lot of stuff that you weren't able to bring out. So here's your chance.
Dave gave me a hard time. I can't remember which sermon it was, but I looked at the clock and I knew I was way over, and I just went straight into my conclusion. And he was like, "Dude, we were flying, we were soaring, and then whoom, planes on the ground." And I kind of felt that way this time because I was just looking at the clock. It's like, I don't know how long I've been.
Yeah.
I don't know if this clock is right, if I'm supposed to stop. What am I supposed to do here? But what I really wanted to highlight was we're coming up on Christmas, and this is a stressful time of year for more people than will admit that it is. Family members in the past have lost their lives this time by one way or another. Some health accidents, whatever the case may be, that weighs on a lot of people's hearts and minds. You have people just trying to pay bills right now and still trying to meet the expectations of their family culture through, we're supposed to have a happy face on and give gifts. And you've got people with their own health concerns, and people put on a smiling face, but they're struggling. And it's hard to say, hey, these people have this war going on around them. There's war all around them. Hey, have faith. But every person is in the position they are, the stress there, if they're in that position for a reason. And God has a promise, and that promise is Christ, and that promise will be fulfilled in their faith. If they're faithful and turn to Christ, that's the whole point I wanted to bring across was we want to solve these problems. We're struggling. we're kept up at night, our hearts are aching. All that is to turn us to Christ, and the only peace that we can have is in Him. And that's really the point that I wanted to bring out in that this wasn't just a cute story of a prophet coming saying, "Hey, look at this shiny new object."
Yeah.
That's not the point. The point is life is hard. Everybody's life is hard, and God is using that to bring you to Him. So come to Christ. That's all I wanted to bring out.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's a good place to shut it down.
Take us home.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for being here today.
I appreciate
Parker.
it. Thanks for coming in.
It was good. It was good. Good conversation. Lots of things to think about. Next time I expect you to do chapter 8.
I'll take a look at that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Parker, for being here. Thanks for joining us today. And if this has been beneficial, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. We will. I'm hoping to get this uploaded. If you're seeing this, it means that I was successful. If it's Wednesday, you'll know that I had to ask Jay to do it for me. So hopefully this has been helpful. I don't know if we're going to have Free for All Friday. If not, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.